quick demonstration also, because we have been talking about conditional access, but let's try to configure one. For example, here we just return to Azure AD. I know that we have a couple of users, but users are already pre-created here from built-in ones. But sometimes it is better to use one of these users, or well, to create just a new, for example. Let's create a new user. Straight into the cloud. Let's call this the user one. I only have one tenant, so it's the default one. Name is required. Let's call this the SC-100. Let's create a new password that will be a permanent. No, sorry. It will be a one-time password. I think that the user will be forced to create a new one for security reasons. So, okay, let's just use. Let me create. The user is no member of a group. I don't have groups to delegate roles, so we can assign a role straight to the user. I can associate a role for this user from the beginning, but it really doesn't matter on it. Let's make the application administrator at the directory level, for example, not at the resource, just at the directory. Roles couldn't be granted, says. Okay, let's give it a second try. Clicking on refresh. Here's the user one. We can take a look at these assigned roles, and there is no assignment so far. Okay, that's okay. Now, we can search for conditional or actually conditional access. Well, however, to turn on these policies, we need to be at least at the Azure AD Premium 1 license. That we actually can enroll for a trial that will give us access to a to to the possibility to create conditional access policies. At least we need a Premium P1. But what I will do is to go to licenses here. Then I can click on the all products, sorry. And I can click on the Microsoft Power Automate Free. And let's take a look on licenses. I've been clicking on try and buy and going for the enterprise mobility for security E5, clicking on activate. Okay, successfully activated enterprise mobility plus security E5 trial, which will include the premium P2. But well, this is something that is going to take a couple of minutes to be reflected on it. So, supposed to this same time that the let's say that the license it is there properly assigned to the user, in order to see that this option is not a grayed out anymore to create a new policy, for example. So what I can do is to force a sign out to see if we can see that the option switches, and that the option to force it to be available after some time you sign out, it's a good idea to close the browser session. So let's go again to the portal, Azure portal, and sign in, but not with my account. However, within this account. to see what happens. Now let's take a look here. Also, we can access to the same conditional access policy by clicking on the properties or security. Okay, oh, clicking on the security option and then under protect, conditional access. And well, the policy is not listed there. It's not ready there. I can only see the change online requires compliant device. And well, now that I just click here on conditional access, that I can see the new policy option is not grayed out anymore because now reflect the recent change that was, oh, this guy already has the license, the premium, for example. And because this global admin has permissions to do whatever he wants at the directory level, that I can see here. So when I'm just clicking on a new policy, this is where we can start, for example, setting up the policy name, and then starting to configuring the multiple signals. For example, the one associated to which group of selected users would you like to check on? And I can start searching, for example, for, oh, the user one. Then we can move on to the other signals, the cloud apps or the actions that we can easily include or exclude with a selection of a laptop computers, for example. Let's say that I don't need Office 365 or I'm not just so happy with the service. And also we can search and find for the Microsoft Azure management, that is the Azure portal, the one that I'm using actually right now. So my condition would be that when a user included here, that is the user one, tries to access with one of these applications or two, like the Office 365, the Microsoft Azure management. Well, let me just remove because I wanted to see a difference. Just configure the Azure portal access. And let's set into the conditions. I can, if I'm using identity protection, user risk detection and signing risk detection on. On device platforms, I can be so specific to set this to yes, and including, for example, only a limited list of operating systems, like, oh, just for Windows, but not to macOS, not to Linux, and yes to the other mobile platforms, for example. So you can click here on done, on locations. I can specify that. On the client applications, is if I'm using one of them, like a browser, mobile app, and desktop clients, and so on. Filter for devices. Then I can setting up some matching rules and with expressions and with a rule syntax, for example. So, oh, on the access control, what do I want to achieve? Grant access, but with requirements like required MFA and turning it on automatically. And up to sessions and establishing a terms of use or something like that we can select it from here. Once that we are ready with this policy, we can set this policy to on, basically. So we can just click here to create. And now it says creating the policy. Remember that this policy has a scope of a user, and this user is we should see the user one. Yeah, user one, or with the display name of SC100. It's included into this policy. So I can decide to turn on the policy. I already turning it on. So what we can do, remember that I just configured the user like a couple of minutes ago, like a 5 or 10 minutes ago, and a new incognito session here. I can try to sign in. that user account. So it is user one, and I just need to pull the tenant name. Just give me a second. Get it from here. You go to Azure Active Directory to get the information from this primary domain because I don't remember. Then I can just switch back, paste it here. I did identify that that user account exists. I'm signing in for the first time, but I can see this legend, and the legend says more information is required. Where do you think that this or why this message was triggered? Because of my recently turned on policy is considering that every sign-in request from that user one is going to be evaluated because of the conditions that I just set. And the condition that was set is when the user is trying to open the Azure management application that is representing the Azure portal, which is my case with this request or with this attempt to sign in. Instead of authenticating and authorizing the user is prompted with a more information is required. If you remember, the access control was set to allow, but require the user to use MFA. I did not configure MFA to the user manually, but I just set it from one of the policies, from the conditional access policy, for example. So if the user follows the prompt and clicks on next, then the user will be redirected to configure its security profile and select its secure authentication mechanism, like downloading the Microsoft Authenticator app, or if they want it, if the user wants to set up a different, for example, with through phone, clicking on confirm, then I can select my country code and then my phone number, and to click on next. To finally, well, just I will receive I should receive a code. Give me a second here. 29 34 15. Then we can click on next. This can complete the process and finally allow the user to do that. So all the time the user signs out and signs in again, the policy is turned on. Now, this is what I was telling you from the beginning when I just created this user, that the password that I just set up for the user, it will be a temporary one because the password protection policy is forcing me to create a new password version that should be different than the previous one. Okay. Now, within this same user and the same session, let me just copy again this user principal name. Remember that I just select a single software as a service app to access that is represented by the Azure portal. What happens if within this same computer, browser, same conditions, I'm switching to a different URL to sign in? Remember that I just removed the Office 365 application. So to access the Office 365, basically I go for login.microsoftonline.com or www.office.com, for example. User is prompted to sign in, but the user is prompted for signing in with the password, not with multi-factor authentication, because the multi-factor is only triggered by the conditional policy, and the policy is only turned on or is triggering the MFA code only on the condition that that user tries to access to that software as a service app represented by the Azure portal. So in this case, the user can complete the process. Let me just try to create a new password. I'm sorry, just made a mistake here. Okay, apparently this is the right one. Now user, well, the password. Well, let's try it with something different. See if it works. Less characters, but different than a CN too many times. Okay, stay signed in, clicking on yes, and the user is able to sign into the office.com, the Office 365 application, basically. If within the same browser, in the same session, the user is typing the portal.azure.com, now I just see a prompt for verify the identity. Just by switching to a different application, the MFA triggers because the condition for the policy is set to trigger all the time, the MFA code. So when I'm making a difference between the signing attempt with one browser to one application and with the other session to another,